All right, well, I guess we could get started. But yeah, first, yeah, thank you so much for taking time to do this. I know you're a busy guy.
Certainly, my pleasure.
Uh-huh.
I
So,
always like to talk about myself.
so I guess to start off, how did music find you, and what guided you into the direction for composing for picture and film?
Um, I think mostly like progressive FM radio in the Midwest was probably my big source of entertainment as a kid. I didn't get a whole lot out of television,
Mm-hmm.
and I think FM radio was the closest thing to fine art that a kid could get exposed to in Ohio. And my obsession with music began in the late 60s and early 70s, and I listened to bands like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix.
All right.
And as I got older, my taste in music began to change, and I also became fascinated with how computer technology was influencing music. And at that time, I was also becoming a movie fan. I stopped going to nightclubs and started going to movie theaters. So that's my interest changed.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the most significant turning point was I happened to get a lucky break and was asked to score an episode of Pee-wee's Playhouse by the then director, Steven Johnson, who was actually going to do a Chili Pepper video. And that's how we met.
All right.
And that was my first scoring job. I loved it. It was great fun. I got to write some of the weirdest music that I've ever written. And then I got to see it on national television, and the process was great fun, and the money wasn't too bad either. So after that, I was kind of hooked.
So I mean, and you mentioned that your background started, with in the rock background and with Red Hot Chili Peppers and among other bands. Was there a point where you decided that it was enough of that and wanted to shift over, or did you get tired of it, or you just thought it was time to move on to something different?
Yeah, the Chili Peppers was probably a turning point. But I mean, it wasn't just that. It was just kind of that point in my life, I think. I'd always aspired to be a rock star, and I got a little whiff of that in the Chili Peppers, as well as a number of other groups. But there came a point when my musical taste changed, and playing drums in a band just wasn't enough.
All right.
I wanted to create my own music, and I just realized that both the music and the lifestyle of touring with a rock band wasn't for me, or at least it wasn't something I wanted to do indefinitely. And I loved playing drums, I loved writing music, but going out on stage and playing the exact same thing night after night really got to me after a few years.
Yeah.
And besides, I just had a hard time kind of visualizing myself at age 40 going out onto stage with nothing but a sock on my genitals with the Chili Peppers.
Well, I mean, a lot of great composers, I mean, you included, but among others, Danny Elfman and Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, they've come from, rock backgrounds. And do you find that today that's still the case, that more mainstream music can shape new composers for the film industry?
Yeah, I mean, you just named some guys that are great examples of very talented film composers that have contributed a great deal to film music, and they come from rock and roll. But I don't think that's going to change as the record industry appears to be dying a slow, miserable death. More and more, songwriter and band people are entering the film scoring business in even greater numbers. And it kind of shaped my style as a film composer too, although I really had to do a lot of retooling to enter this business.
All right.
My basic skills as a drummer only took me so far. I really had to learn composition and computers and films. So I'm not sure what the important takeaway is from rock and roll for these guys. I think they really I think they're really two different things. But like a lot of professions, you have to evolve or die, and
Right.
and that's the case with trying to make it from that part of music to film music.
And did you play any other instruments besides drums?
At the time, I was playing drums professionally. No.
Oh, right. Did you like today? Do you have any music that you listen to? Any favorite composers or bands or musicians?
Well, growing up, aside from the ones I mentioned earlier, I also liked and was influenced by artists like Black Sabbath and Miles Davis, Captain Beefheart, James Brown. And I think the first soundtracks that grabbed my attention were The Day the Earth Stood Still and A Fistful of Dollars.
Mm.
Nowadays, I am trying to start a new habit. I try not to listen to music carelessly. Instead of listening while driving or doing the dishes, I try to sit down between a pair of speakers and give my complete attention to whatever it is I'm listening to. And I'm trying a new policy at Casa Cliff that I call hardcore, fat-free, no-nonsense listening. So that means like only great music, no lightweights. So lately it's been Debussy and Bob Marley, the Rolling Stones recently, who I never bought a single album of in my youth. Louis Armstrong's another one. So that's what's on the that's what's been on the turntable recently.
All right, so I guess moving from your influence and stuff and jumping into of course everyone knows about your collaboration with Steven Soderbergh, and me, I'm not a musician. I'm writer, director, and I'm a visualizer from that aspect of filmmaking. So I really want to know how important is the composer-director relationship, and how does that work?
Well, the relationship itself is all important. I mean, without it, you find yourself standing next to the freeway entrance with a cardboard sign reading "We'll score for food." So, without that, you don't. I mean, that's who hires you. Usually, I'm not really. I'm seldom selected by a producer or anybody else. It's always the director that is the person who selects you. So, that level, the relationship is crucial. But creatively, it's equally important. I'm, in debt to all the directors I've worked with, because it's generally their ideas and direction that are responsible for how the music turns out. It certainly has a huge influence on it. The case of Steven Soderbergh is unique for me. Steven is the only director that I've done 10 films with over the past 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, a lot of my scores for Steven have a bit of an edge because of that, that ancient history that we share. I guess, I can go on and on about the relationship.
Right.
I think basically it's the Steven thing is special. I don't know, that many guys that had that kind of a long run with a single director.
Yeah, when you look at, obviously John Williams, but like most of the, I think great composers, yourself included, they have that continuing bond with, a director, and they continue through their profession. But I think your best music comes from Steven's films. So, but
yeah, and probably the the relationship, the longness of it, or the semi-monogamousness of it, contributes to that. I think it does seem to get better. I thought Sex, Lies, and Videotape was okay, but Traffic was kind of a similar idea, but was light years ahead of it.
Yeah.
And both of us had just gotten older and wiser.
And
mostly older.
Well, speaking of that, like looking back at Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and now with Contagion, what's different about your process with Steven, and what remained the same from all the way back then?
Well, in the early days, we used to spend a lot more time together. As for Sex, Lies, and Videotape, we were just getting acquainted. And today, now, we practically communicate telepathically or through very brief emails or text messages. I think I understand him a lot better now than then, and vice versa. Both of us have grown a lot artistically, so I think we both bring a lot of new tricks as well as old ones to the table. And what hasn't changed is Steven is kind of the same person in spite of all of his success and artistic development. He still pretty much feels like the same guy.
Mm-hmm.
He even looks exactly the same as he did 10 years ago, which it's been almost that long since Solaris.
Well, so say if you know you're going to be scoring a film for Steven, do you get involved during the pre-production process, or do you wait till he's done with everything and gives it to you?
With everybody else, you usually get it when they're pretty close to done with everything except for the sound and the music. But with Steven, I think he's been the only director to officially hire me before he starts shooting.
Right.
And because of that, I used to occasionally come to the set or try to write some music before seeing the picture. And every time I've done that, it just seems like it was a complete waste of time. I don't ever seem to get any tangible results until I've actually seen the picture. But still, I think reading the script in advance and having conversations with Steven before shooting does give me a bit of an edge and a head start. The process of composing probably actually starts somewhere long before I see the film or before I even write music with Steven. I'm not sure, where it begins, but oftentimes the process of composing for me is laying on the couch staring at the ceiling, and I've got a lot more time to do that with Steven's projects because of that, because of I'm officially on the picture much earlier.
And have you ever come across, say, when he's decided to do Ocean's 11, the remake, and David was going to score that, where you're like, oh damn, I kind of wish I wanted to do that. Have you ever come across that where you wish you were doing it?
Yeah, just about every single film of his that I haven't scored.
Fair enough. I thought you would have done a pretty good job with Che. Kind of wish you did that one. But moving on from Soderbergh, and I guess coming to Drive, with which is I just saw it and I thought it's one of the best films of the year, and I love the story and the visuals and the soundscape, and your music really worked perfectly, and I think a lot of the tones and shifts of your score mimic the cinematography and kind of fed off of that in terms of lights and colors. And is that true, or am I just kind of making stuff up out of air?
Yeah, I think if the cinematography and the colors had exerted any influence on it, it was probably kind of subliminal. I mean, I do respond to sort of the look of a film. Often will have an influence. Oftentimes I don't think about it that much, but it does have an influence. Usually the speed at which a scene moves will kind of have an effect on the rhythm of the music. But it wasn't first and foremost in my mind. Nicholas Refn was an idea machine, and I probably was more influenced by his direction than I was by the cinematography or the look of the film, I guess. But I think all of that stuff kind of factors in at some level. It just, that aspect of it I was not all that conscious of, but I know that it kind of fit. I know that it was a kind of a very poetic sort of a film, and what worked about the music was that it complemented that. So I think I took in the whole package, but for the most part, my thinking was, scoring the music from the standpoint of the character, and from all the ideas that Nicholas threw at me.
Right. And another huge aspect of the film, or the source music and the songs that he picked out. Did you know beforehand what songs were going to be in the film, and did you work around those songs to fit kind of the soundscape, or was that not involved in your process?
Yeah, the songs had a lot of impact. I was asked to join the party very late. The film was locked, meaning there was no more editing to be done, which is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
The songs had been selected, and the songs had actually been, I think, licensed and purchased, which is also unusual. So I knew they were going to be there, but mostly I've had difficulty kind of mirroring the songs in the underscore. Sometimes the song choices are too eclectic to give you a unified style to role model.
Mm-hmm.
The songs have such dissimilar functions that I often don't take the songs into account all that much when writing the score. With Drive, though, the songs seem to be making such an important style statement that I felt I had to acknowledge them somehow. And I think it was a little easier in the case of Drive because the 80s synth pop thing was so sharply defined.
Right, yeah.
The only black sheep in the score really is Oh My Love, but after seeing the film like 100 times now, even that seems to fit in perfectly with all the retro synth sounds.
Mm-hmm. And and speaking of, there's a lot of scenes and sequences where sound and the music and just songs kind of take front and center, but there's also silence plays a huge role in the film as well. And when the film was spotted, were there sections of the film that said we don't want music here, or did you have to kind of build up to these moments or pockets of silence, and how hard is it to lead up to silence to create the tension and then back away and then come back in later?
Well, I think that kind of setup, where the music is like the prelude or the aftermath, mm-hmm. Was a kind of a popular device in Drive, and I think if anything, those types of things, that type of scoring might be a little bit easier because the purpose of the music is much clearer. Where you're going and what you're trying to set up and what you're trying to do.
Okay.
I think the most difficult question to answer about film scoring is, why is there music here? And if you don't know the answer, then writing the music is going to be a lot more difficult, or maybe there shouldn't be any music there at all in the first place. So yeah, I kind of got those scenes, and that I credit Nicholas with the spotting of the film, the structure, where music started, where music stopped.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was one hell of a tense film, so kudos to the both of you. But I guess starting to wrap things up, looking back at a general sense, what was the hardest score that you've had to write so far? That was kind of the most challenging experience for you.
Kafka, probably. That was partially because it was my second film, and I still didn't really know what I was doing. And I had this idea about the score being dominated by the cymbalum, which is like a big hammered dulcimer. And I decided, rather than to hire a cymbalum player, which would have been the easy way, I created a sampled cymbalum and decided to play it using drumsticks and learning how to play the cymbalum, basically. So I burned a whole lot of calories in the creation of that score. I really did that the hard way. I think one of the easiest might actually be Drive. I was hired about 4.5 weeks before the film was sent to the Cannes Film Festival.
Wow.
And I'm usually accustomed to having, more time than that. So in one sense it was hard because I had to cram a lot of work into a shorter time frame. But it was easy in a sense because the film was really good, the director was great, and I was having fun most of the time. But what probably actually made it easy was that there was hardly any time for doubts or second thoughts. Everything was like first take.
Mm-hmm.
I always had to go with my first impulse. And, Nicholas was very attentive and hands-on, but he was also pretty forgiving because we had a deadline to meet. And I can say for a fact that there have been many, many times when my first impulse is a disaster. But fortunately for Drive, everything just seemed to click.
Yeah, it definitely did. So was Drive 100% electronic, or was there any instruments in there whatsoever?
Oh yeah, there's Bache crystal,
Mm-hmm.
is a acoustic instrument. There was a saz, which is a Turkish stringed folk instrument.
Oh, okay.
Sitar is in there. Electric guitar. All the keyboards, the pianos and things are fake, but I guess those are the real things. And you might not recognize. Well, most people wouldn't know what a Bache crystal is anyhow, but the stringed instruments, except for the guitar, were often, the saz and the sitar were used kind of for sound design purposes, for atmospheric pads and textures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some, quote unquote, human beings playing instruments in there somewhere.
Well, I mean, it all worked. I mean, it was the whole soundscape. It just felt very fluid, and I think it was. Well, I loved it a lot. So, but so I guess when you're sitting down to start to write something, or whether you're looking at the film for the first time, are you drawing mostly from the characters, the plot, where's the biggest inspiration for ideas coming from?
Well, the characters, the plot, and the photography, the look of the film,
right,
setting, the environment, all those things kind of play a role, but usually not all of those things in equal amounts. I have a strong preference for creating the music from this perspective of being inside the character's head. That's usually where I look first.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's the type of films that I've worked on, or maybe it's the director's own preference, but that's kind of where I start from. And then I try to take into account the other things. Often the environment is a big thing, like traffic. I always thought that the way Mexico looked was very romantic and dirty.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the dirty place you really want to go visit for your vacation.
Yeah.
Sometimes that has an impact, and but I guess for me, character first. That's probably has the strongest influence.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to wrap things up, I always like to ask composers this question: if you had the opportunity to score any film in the history of cinema, with no disrespect to the original composer, what film would you choose?
I think I would take any classic film from the late 20s or early 30s, like King Kong would have been a good one.
Yeah.
Would love to be able to go back in time to be there during the birth of film sound.
Right, yeah.
All the technology, the synthesizers and the plugins, the knowledge and experience that I have now, and just mow down the competition.
Well, that's a good answer. I like that one. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm out of questions for you, but I really appreciate you taking the time for this, though, Cliff. Thank you so much.